everybody. Welcome to the Aligned Investor. We're back. It's been a couple months.
It's been a while.
So again, I'm Joshua Luer, and this is my buddy Mike Mahoney. We're our team up here for the Aligned Investor Show. Today's topic is the 60-40 portfolio dead? And that was shown in a Barron's report back in earlier this year. What do you think, Mike? Is a 60-40 portfolio dead, and what is it?
Well, it's interesting that it's brought up again because if you looked in the media 10 plus years ago, they were asking the same thing: is it dead? And quite frankly, it goes through cycles. Well, I guess you would think it's dead, but there's no normalcy to returns. So you're going to have a lot of random periods. Some are going to be negative. Some are going to make people think it's dead. But if you look at the data, I see no reason to say a statement such as that.
Yeah,
and we'll take a look at it today.
Yeah, let's take a look at it today. So the first thing is, some of you might not know what a 60-40 portfolio is. Mike, take it away.
So a 60-40 portfolio is a standard measure that's used in the institutional world for benchmarking or measuring a portfolio's performance, just as a goalpost. So what they do, in the simplest terms, you can take a 60% allocation to the S&P 500 index, which can be bought as a fund or an ETF, or just use the index as a measure. And then for the fixed income, the safe part, they use an aggregate bond index, which includes long-term bonds, short-term bonds, etc., corporate bonds, and they use that as a measure of the return of the portfolio. And quite frankly, it's a great starting place when you're building a portfolio. I like to start there with people, and if you want to juice it up a little bit, maybe you go 70-30. If you're really young, you can probably go 80-20 or even maybe 100% if you really have a strong risk tolerance as well. And then you maybe, if you really don't have a strong risk tolerance and you're retired, maybe you do go 50-50 or quite possibly 40-60. Mm-hmm. But somewhere in there, because you got to negate inflation.
Sure. So my experience with the 60-40 portfolio dates back all the way to like the early 90s. I was reading John Bogle's on mutual funds, right? Bogle Mutual Fund. And then he mentioned 60-40, and then in his older age, right before he passed away, he said, you could do a lot worse if you didn't.
For sure. Yeah. I was just thinking that when you were saying that. I mean, if you were to compare this to a lot of professionals, I would say you'd find a lot of the pros don't beat a simple portfolio like this.
Yeah, and that's the stuff we've been talking about forever, from fees to diversification, behavioral issues. But so I guess someone would choose a 60-40 portfolio because of diversification and someone with a good track record. But tell the audience what happened last year.
It was a tough year. The first, we looked at the data going back to 1950, and there's only been 3 periods where you had stocks and bonds both go down in the same year. And whenever you see that, you know that inflation's occurring, right? Because the bonds are down. We kind of alluded to that. But if you look at the numbers, the S&P was down 18% for the year. That's the stock index. And then you look at long treasury bonds, down 30% for the year.
Yeah, we told people to watch out in a rising rate environment, so I feel good about that.
And then, long-term, 10-year treasuries were down 15%, so it got battered. It was a tough year.
Tough year. And I think what people need to realize is that, the 60-40 portfolio, or any type of broad-based diversified portfolio, you might have an average, but does that always hit the average? I mean, it seems to be like, we're going to get an 8-9% rate of return, but what actually does it look like?
It looks like what we showed there. I mean, it's very random, and you rarely ever get close to what the historical average is. And you have some years that are stellar and some years that aren't so stellar. And the key is rebalancing to that target, if that's your target, and staying the course. And we'll kind of talk about that more as we proceed.
That's one of our key themes, right? Staying the course.
Discipline, right? Have a plan.
And definitely. And what we find is that your return or investor's return has a lot to do with your asset allocation, not timing the market, right?
It's huge. Yeah, and that's why I guess focusing on just this benchmark as a place to work from is really good, because if you look at that, what drives returns is the bulk of it's the asset allocation. Very little of it is actual trying to pick the winning stocks.
Right.
And people don't get that. They really don't get that, and that's why I like to hammer this home and show the source, and people look at it and they need to get it, because too many people, especially they chase dividends and they want to own the the tech stuff, the tech is really on fire. It's hot. It's been really good, and they're looking backwards, but forward looking is probably not a good way to go.
So I think people, and I see that even in my own self, overconfidence bias, right? Like I can time, I can pick versus
and recency, right?
And recency, right? For sure.
Yeah.
Risk and return relationships, Mike. They're not like that's what that.
Yeah, that's kind of what they're starting to allude to, right? It's not normal, but
It's
they give a better
distribution.
example of that. I think is if you look at taking a look at the S&P 500 versus a 30-day Treasury. Now, mind you, I said 30-day, not 30-year.
Short, yeah.
It's a 1 month Treasury bond. It's think of CD, 1 month long.
Yep.
There's been 3 periods in the last 100 years where you've had to go close to 15 years just to match the 30-day Treasury return with the S&P 500 return.
Yeah.
So and that I think that's why then you start to see these articles, is a 60-40 dead? Because when you have these periods occur, everybody's down on it and there's going to have to be a new strategy. This old one hasn't worked. Well, returns are random. Let's just face it, they are.
They are.
And the world is not normal, and there are going to be periods of time when you get underperformance, overperformance, and you've got to just stay disciplined.
Right. So for those of you that are in a portfolio and have stuck with it, you found that this year's been a little bit better. And what should we expect a 60-40 portfolio to do in the future? What should you expect maybe even your portfolio to do in the future? Well, it's hard to know. Vanguard's put out a brand new article called The Improved Outlook for the 60-40 Portfolio. And some of the reasons why it's improved is really because the valuations have kind of come back to from the stratosphere for equities, although equities are kind of moving up a little bit. But also bonds and non-U.S. bonds have really kind of come down in valuation. So it's about of like.
Well, and I do want
right?
people to look at the disclaimer at the end on this. When you start talking about expected returns, that's data from Vanguard.
Yes,
We're not
Vanguard.
saying that's going to happen yet. We have no idea what's going to occur. It's just for educational purposes. But yeah, I mean, even if we just get reversion to the mean, forget about the valuations, we're going to get more like historical. If we've been way above historical, we're going to get closer to historical on some returns.
Yeah, and I think it's important. Like if you look at sort of like the 10-year expected return from Vanguard, I mean. It went up from last year, from 2021, from 3.83 moving forward for 10 years up to 6.09 for 10 years moving forward.
For the 60-40.
Yeah.
And we remember historical's about 8, so that's still close to 30% off of the historical return.
Right.
Yeah.
Because of excess returns in
Sure.
the previous years. All right. So solutions to soften the 60-40 portfolio ride that you're on, right? So. And what do we although this show's about recommendations, we can't advise you, but
education.
Education, right?
Thank you.
Okay, good.
It's from my compliance office.
Yeah, thank you. By the back office there.
Yeah.
What would we recommend differently than maybe just a straight up 60-40?
There's some simple things that you can do to tweak your 60-40 or your 50-50 or your 70-30, whatever it is. Mm-hmm. Instead of just being in the U.S. S&P 500, how about let's take 30 or 40% of that and put it into international equities? Mm-hmm. How about we take the U.S. portion and maybe have some U.S. value, large value, some small value, and then also on the bond side, instead of just being in an aggregate bond index, we have a huge exposure to long-term bonds and also term credit with corporate bonds. If you go shorten your maturities and focus on investment-grade fixed income, you really safe in the safe part, which is supposed to be safe anyways, right? Because, I mean, you think about it, the point of fixed income is conservative, steady income, and then the point of the equities is growth, so diversify your growth, and that should soften the ride and maybe even help provide a better outcome in the long term.
Yep. Diversification is key, one of our key virtues we talk about, as well as discipline, keeping yourself disciplined. Remember, markets can remain irrational longer than you can remain solvent. That's from John Maynard Keynes. So there's randomness in the market. So just stay disciplined because it'll pay off in the long run. Because when it's 8 out of 10 years, usually it's up, right? So one last thing is that sometimes people, it's behavior. They chase returns. Like the last decade's been pretty good to technology and large cap. The top 8 to 10 stocks have really blown up. So, what do we see from a recent Wall Street Journal article that shows how people's behaviors change from this? These.
Well, yeah, we're talking about asset allocations, right? How aggressive people are. That's why I thought I'd add this at the end. It was just interesting. This was two sources of data. One of them was retirees or people that are in the retirement plans at Vanguard, because they manage tens of thousands of people's 401ks, where they can see the data. And 50% of 401k investors over 55. 70% of their portfolios in stocks. So, I can live with that if they're aware of it and they're rebalancing and then they can handle their risk tolerance and they don't fall out of bed when things drop. But the point being is that number was only 38% back in 2011. So that tells you, like you alluded to, people are chasing returns probably and using recency as their guide. Yeah. And also, if you look at the data on the taxable side of things, this is even more shocking. 20% of investors, 85 and older, have nearly all of their money in stocks.
Yeah, that's a little heavy.
And that number was 16% back in 2012, so it's still heavy. So that kind of surprises me, because I have a feeling some of those people are going to be in for a rude awakening when we get a big dip. They're going to do something foolish and take a temporary loss and make it permanent.
Yep. So I think we all know here, Mike, that money isn't everything in life, but you should be able to take care of yourself and your financials as your plan dictates, right? And we don't want people to go through life blindly, just throwing 100% on their allocation to equities.
Right. And I think when we talk about these different asset allocations, whatever someone ends up choosing, I think what they need to really be evaluating at times like this is, like, the point of the measure is, you want to have a target allocation and you want to have some type of tolerances where you rebalance to that, because if you just let things grow, which maybe that's what some of these people are doing, if you were originally 60-40, 15 years ago, 10 years ago, you've done no rebalancing, your equities have outgrown your fixed income, and you're now maybe 80-20, which is part of it. You have to rebalance your portfolio as well, at least maybe once a year.
I was going to ask you, what do you think once a year is a good time to get with your advisor and sit down and say, what has happened, and
at least on our end, we don't just do it on a calendar year. We're actually tracking, and we have bands and percentages. But I'm just saying, for general advice to someone that's doing it themselves or not doing it at all, at least do it once a year.
Yeah, there you go.
Yeah.
Well, some good advice from the Light Investor.
Good to be back.
Good to be back. Yeah. Thanks, folks, for watching. Make sure you like and subscribe, and we'll see you on the next Light Investor. Take care.